I'm told we're live. Okay. Greetings and welcome to the Saroth the Mage experiment. Tonight we're going to be doing a show on addiction and how magic, occultism and spirituality can kind of help you on your journey to recovery. With me, I've got the magnificent Keats Ross of Pragmagick, and we've also got Derek Hunter, author, experiencer, and welcome, everyone. So, where do we start with this multifaceted thing about like addiction, magic? Keats, let's start with you. First of all, how did you get kind of into drugs, and how did you use spirituality to get out of your addictions?
That's a good question. The confluence was always kind of there. You know, I think I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I moved out on my own around like late 16, 17 years old and finished high school on my own. And that was kind of the culmination of, you know, dealing with kind of abandonment issues and distress through, you know, drinking and excess. And it kind of, but there was a parallel to magical practice at that time. I was also voraciously reading, you know, a lot of chaos magic texts, and was very involved with like the disinfo culture, the Richard Metzger era. So it was very parallel. And of course, you know, there was Diary of a Drug Fiend, which, you know, in my lowest kind of low in my early 20s, you know, I was reading while battling, you know, heroin addiction. And there always seemed to be a kind of okayness with the confluence. Not that I'm a huge Crowleyite in any case, but, you know, that book kind of spurred a lot of my chagrin or like nonchalance about my own kind of hollowness and escapism. And, you know, when I was at the lowest of my low, it's when kind of magic depleted entirely. I didn't have a spiritual praxis. I didn't have, you know, a lot of anchors or anything. I really thought that I was on my way out, and there was nothing, you know, buoying me to any degree. And I remember I still have it. I actually posted it on my wall. I wrote kind of a, you know, I've been in and out of like mental institutions and, you know, detox centers, and I was just pretty much on my way out. And I remember sitting in my like abandoned, dark apartment my really bad year, the year I spent in Phoenix, Arizona, about 10 years ago, and wrote myself, I had recalled kind of intention and manifestation. And I wrote this letter basically being, you know, method acting about how to get out of it and what I need to do to move on. And, you know, in short order, it worked. It like really rejuvenated me and motivated me to, you know, kind of seek the other again, to commune with my mental health a bit and pull myself out. Now, you know, it wasn't a clean break. I think a lot of you can agree that recidivism is pretty, you know, normal, I think, for a lot of ex-addicts or users. So it was a few years of dipping back in and dipping back out. But, you know, as my kind of conscious praxis grew stronger and, you know, my spiritual musings and whatnot, I found that it kind of evaded a lot of that hollow emptiness, need for dissociation that riddled my life when I was younger. So yeah, and that's kind of where we here are today. You know, I'm still, this is a huge confluence for me, especially when it comes to mental health. And in this day and age, having, you know, I was on medications and finally figured it out and sought help in my late 20s, and eventually got to get off of those medications. So I'm going pretty commando. My brain is in commando mode without a lot of pharmaceutical help or, you know, insurance matters or any of that. And so I've leaned heavily on my own kind of divergent magic to help, lift the physical, the emotional, the psychical, the spiritual. And it works in high regards for me. And yeah, that's really what brought me here today. I'm really excited to keep continuing this discussion. And there's a lot of hope in that, and it's a continuing experiment.
Yeah,
Such a good
I think
channel.
I think for me, and I'm reflecting on this more and more. The greatest magical work I ever did was stopping crack cocaine and heroin, and I was deeply involved in it. How about you, Derek? What was your journey to this point?
Well, I think it's in regards to addiction and in magical practice, the occult. I think for me, it's an odd story because I didn't really seriously get into the occult until I was in the throes of my addiction to crystal meth. So I was a serious crystal meth user, doing it every day. It was the very first thing that I would do every morning was hit that crystal meth pipe, and it was something that I was seriously in love with. It was something that I worshipped, and I could not live without it. And in the process of that, this is again so interesting for it, that 10-year period. Same thing for Keats. About 10 years ago for me was when about the time when I was getting into it. Actually, 10 years ago from January. It was January of 2010, and it was through a woman that I was seeing, and she was a dealer, and I originally tried to get cocaine from her because I had done crystal before in my 20s, and I never every time I had done it, I didn't like the crash, the come down, the feeling the next day. And so she told me, well, just keep on doing it, and then you'll never crash. And that's what I did. Eventually, not over time. It wasn't right away after meeting her. But anyway, I was at that when I met her. I was not really. What was this? Yeah, I was reading about the occult, but I was interested, and I was getting into Robert Anton Wilson and so forth. I was starting to, and I was into coil, and I was curious about coil and why they, kept on bringing up, Austin Spare and Aleister Crowley and Magick, and so I was, it was curious about it, and then my heavy substance use led me into deeper and deeper conspiracy theories, and I just, was had yet to come out of Chapel Perilous. At that point, when it came to conspiracy theories, I had yet to really glean the real deep philosophy of Robert Anton Wilson's agnosticism regarding conspiracy theories, because my mind was just so warped from the drugs I was doing. So from there, I got into weird conspiracy theories, especially with Stanley Kubrick and the Illuminati, and then through that, I think, I'd always been kind of interested in some kind of revolutionary experience, whether it would be political or metaphysical or personal. And I'd always kind of shied away from the occult and was very skeptical of it. But then when I noticed that it seemed like the elites, the powerful, at least in these conspiracy theories, kept on pointing to the fact that the elites were practitioners of magic and that they were using it to control and manipulate us, right? That interested me. And then from there is when I started to well, if they're doing it, then let me do it. Like if the way to empower myself is to use magic as they do, then let me go for it. So that's how I got into the occult, was primarily because my brain was twisted from meth and other drugs. And so I was doing a lot of psychedelics at that time too. And so not to do my whole story, so let me fast forward, to just when I decided that I was going to get away from this life of substance abuse, I realized that I had to use magic to help me, because I had done enough rituals by that point. About 2014, so 4 years later, but I was still drinking. So after I quit meth and hard drugs, I was still drinking, and that whole year after quitting meth was horrible. It was just as bad. Like alcohol for me, was just as bad as crystal. And I did a number of bad things that year. But so I did rituals to quit meth. I did rituals to quit alcohol a year later. And then it worked, and of course they had to do other things too. It wasn't just the magic ritual, but it was just interesting for me that I look at the beginning of my substance abuse issues, that period of like 3.5 years where I was really, really bad in the throes of crystal meth addiction, to ending it. Really a big part of it helped me to end it was magical practice.
Absolutely. My journey through, the first time I ever took a drug was like when I was in first year at what you'd call high school, we call secondary school. I think I was about 11 or 12 years old. Someone gave me a line of speed. And from that day onwards, I was absolutely fascinated and in the thrall of drugs. But parallel to that, I was reading Crowley, and it seemed to me that drugs were magic, pretty much inseparable. Altered states of consciousness allowed you to tilt the mirror to see things in a completely different way. And I hammered through the 80s and 90s in a pretty much a haze. And this is still something I struggle with. You guys are drinking coffee tonight. I'm drinking beer. So am I really in recovery, or am I just switching heroin and crack cocaine for, alcohol?
I don't look at it like that. I don't think it's as cut and dry. I think, as we were saying off air, and Derek would be, I think, the authority on this because of his profession and his own story, but there is harm reduction, I think, in alcohol use. I don't think you can composite one over the other. You know what I mean? I did personally, and it's something I've been struggling with. I only stopped drinking this past week for the 800th time, but I was using it in lieu of like my own mental issues, I would say, the detriment of how I am in socio, persuasions, talking or being, interpersonal with people and stuff. I leaned on it too hard, and the casualness and the nonchalance of my attitude with it, I think, was the more insidious factor. But if you put it on the altar of understanding, that it can be a serious affliction in and of itself, I think that, you can round yourself into a harm reductive state with it. I don't know, Derek, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I think the one of the big problems with addiction is just how there's so much gray area. It's definitely like addiction studies is something that it's not an exact science, and there's no one methodology or modality that's going to work. There's no one solution that's going to work for everyone. And I do think, though, that there are certain things that you can kind of that are pretty consistent. And like, so, like when I quit crystal and I like done with hard drugs, I had been, prior to my 3.5 year run of doing crystal, I was a pretty heavy drinker, but it never really resulted in me losing a job or committing a crime or I never got a DUI. So it did cause problems in my personal life. I've had a problem with my anger. I have a problem with perceiving things in ways, and my mind starts coming up with stories about other people and how other people view me. And so the alcohol would just make that worse. And
Yeah.
so, so it was a problem for me. Now, did it result in, again, like I said, I didn't go to prison, didn't go to
Right.
do anything. I mean, I spent 3 days in jail, but that was for hitting a parking enforcement vehicle I was kicking, which was dumb. Again, an example of my bad temper.
Yeah, the only time I've been in jail is due to altered states, you know.
Okay. What I brought that up though was that I wasn't intoxicated at that time. So
Okay.
what I was saying is that when I quit crystal, I looked back at my life and I said, okay, well, I was like a heavy drinker, and sure, like I got into fights and I kind of like it messed up some of my relationships, but like I never lost my job, I never got a DUI, I never went to jail because of it or anything. So I justified it. So I said,
Yeah.
well, I'll be fine. I'll be okay to be drinking. But the problem was, though, my brain had already been conditioned to waking up every morning with crystal meth.
Right.
So, and I didn't seek help at all. I didn't go to treatment or rehab. I didn't go to 12-step meetings or any other kind of meetings. I didn't go to therapy. I just figured it was just a matter of will. And I could just, I was unemployed at the time, and I got some jobs, but my drinking was so bad that I didn't show up. A few times I showed up drunk. So it was just, there was that. I got into a really bad fist fight at my son's baseball game, and that was just a horrible experience. There's just a number of things that happened that showed to me that I had a serious problem with alcohol too.
Just to unpack a little bit about that, you said that a year after that you quit, using meth, it was a terrible year for you, right? For me, I had a lust for life like I had never seen before after I quit hard drugs. And it was like racing cars, like I was just like hanging off buildings. You know what I mean? Like I had this zest. If I beat it, I could beat anything. And I was, drinking a lot, getting in bar fights, and I was just like really a rabble rouser. And it felt like because I conquered that, like I could do anything. And that
Sure.
to me was the insidious nature of how, easy it was to fall back into the alcohol stuff.
Sure, right. Yeah, and see, there again is another example. Like it's so circumstantial. Like these situations with addiction is just so different, and it also depends on the drug of choice. Like if you're, for people who are doing meth every day for years, afterwards your brain is fried and you have serious, serious depression. And a lot of people become suicidal, after quitting meth. And that was how I felt. I felt horrible. So I just used alcohol to relieve me of my mental state that I had put myself through for those last, almost 4 years. So I think in regards to what you guys were talking about earlier with harm reduction, so that's definitely a controversial thing. It's not something that is a neat and tidy subject either. There's definitely, as somebody who works in the recovery field, there's some people who are for it, and there's a lot of people who are against it. Keep in mind that most people working in the recovery field are most likely 12-steppers, and the 12 steps is about abstinence.
Could I just stop you? Could you just define what you mean by harm reduction there?
Yeah, I probably should do that. Okay, so harm reduction is this. So it first started out with heroin addicts. So they realized with heroin addicts, there was just more than any other drug, their recidivism was extremely high, and it continues to be that way today. People who are addicted to any kind of opiate it's very difficult to overcome that addiction. So I believe it was in the 60s or 50s, I think the 60s, early 60s, when they introduced this other drug. God, I'm blanking out right now. I'm having a brain fart.
Methadone?
Methadone, yes, right. So right now, the big drug now is Suboxone, but back then it was methadone. So they introduced methadone, and they introduced these methadone clinics. So methadone basically gives the person a very similar feeling to getting high, but they're not technically or supposed to be getting high, which a lot of people would disagree with that. The person really is actually getting high off of methadone. So the harm reduction was there are a lot of people who at that time and still today felt like, well, we would rather have people be addicted to methadone, come every day to get come to methadone clinics. So it was a safe and legal way to get their drug, rather than because, the vast majority of problems with heroin addiction, besides, obviously heroin deaths, one of the other major problems is the pursuit of heroin, what people are willing to do to get heroin, to rob, steal, murder, just to get their drug, and so they felt it was a reduction in crime as well, as if we allow people to have legal access to a drug that is not as pleasurable as heroin, but at least they would be able to do that. And there's been definitely studies to show that that's true, like that does work. People are able to live lives, and they will, have jobs, and they'll have relationships and pursue what they want to do in life, and they'll be on methadone, But there's a lot of other people who have kind of miserable lives too while they're on methadone. So now that was the beginning of harm reduction. Now harm reduction can be also, not everybody believes in this or agrees with this, but can cover other areas of life. So in my personal belief is that everyone is in some ways doing some form of harm reduction and recovery anyway. Like you go to a 12-step meeting, most of the people there
coffee.
they're drinking coffee nonstop at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and they're smoking cigarettes, and it's the stereotype of an AA meeting is that it's filled with smoke. Well, not nowadays, but in the old days, it used to be filled with smoke everywhere. And so that's a form of harm reduction, is that you take a hard drug such as heroin or crystal meth or crack or cocaine or alcohol too. And basically the idea is whatever that replacement is, whether it's methadone for heroin or coffee and cigarettes for alcoholics and other drug addicts, it's a reduction in harm.
Right. So it's a taper. Right.
There's tapering off. Like you can say when you're taking Suboxone, for example, people are supposed to be.
I am currently taking Suboxone, by the way.
Yeah.
So So the doctors don't want you to be on the same level forever. So it's a tapering off is like reducing the amount or the dosage that you're taking.
Yeah. But I see this a lot too. I'm seeing. Love everyone in the comment section too. Just shout out to Redbeard and everyone else that's been very open.
I've never heard of Redbeard, and there's also Santa Maria. It's Darcy.
Imperium Radio. Yeah. They're having a great discussion. I'm just keeping an eye on it. But there's a lot of like Michelle Embry was saying, heroin to beer is harm reduction, and I agree.
Yeah.
But it's also it's dependent, like you said, on the variables of the self, right? Because I could be as problematic or as dependent on alcohol given enough time and care, So it's dependent on the person.
Your addiction,
Yeah,
they don't come overnight.
Right, exactly. And I absolutely agree. People are talking about kratom. Like I still take kratom every now and again. Actually probably more than I should. But it's also it definitely helped me in one of my recidivism accounts like years ago. And You know, I swear by it. It also is, it's basically in the coffee family. So it's kind of that ilk, but it helps the opiate receptors a bit, you know, and it's a bit pain relieving after my back injury. So there's a lot of different things you can use to kind of substitute. And it makes me think though, like harm reduction in a metaphysical sense too, you know, like supposing or supplementing, you know, magic for, or maybe like really intense magic, ceremonial magic, you know, very rigorous, vigorous magic, as opposed to, you know, the heavy illicit states that you could get from drugs. You know,
Well,
because there's a lot of scary stuff too when practicing. And
that's what I did. I threw myself into a course of quite demanding daily ritual. You know, I was doing it was a Golden Dawn curriculum, kind of. Perhaps a slightly new ageified. You know, I think the book that I was following was produced in the 90s, but it would have you doing your solar adorations. You know, Liber Resh. So you had to get up at dawn, and then noon, and then sunset, midnight. I was absolutely flying through that, and that absolutely was a. I don't think I would have ever got off drugs if I hadn't had that. You know, it was discipline. It was like boot camp, magical boot camp.
yeah, I've done prayers and rituals to gain the motivation to do stuff like that too. You know what I mean? Like there's been magical workings I've had just to be able to stick to a routine or like to find the pathway, you know, to keep getting up out of bed every day and doing a certain, you know, thing. So there's levels too of the magical workings, you know, whether it be sigil magic or whatever. I think people take for granted when they're just getting into this that they need to go super big, you know. And I think a good way, you know, to start the harm reduction into magic would be to, you know, start small and do workings to gain the motivation to get, you know, the gusto to keep, you know, practicing and doing it. I don't know.
One thing that I think it would be good to, I wanted to bring up, and just in case it would be forgotten, was that the book that you brought up, Keats, earlier, the Diary of a Drug Fiend by Crowley, is an interesting book. It's, for one thing, it's like one of the best depictions of addiction, especially when it involves a couple, a man and a woman, or any gender. You know, it really, it was so accurate. You know, very powerful story, and but what's interesting about the book is Crowley has his own philosophy regarding addiction, and his own solution, which is about he doesn't believe in abstinence or harm reduction. So he believes in that you should be able to continue taking the heavy, hard drugs, but only you have to be not. You're not supposed to be the slave to the drug. So you're supposed to be able to do it when you want to do it, and only at certain times. And certainly that sounds very appealing.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, but the reality is that, and I think with Crowley's own life played out that way too, especially at the end of his life, was that is extremely hard to do. And I have really, it's hard for me to remember all the people I've known over the years who've done drugs, who could do it like that.
Yeah.
You know? And Crowley was a master of willpower, and he, you know,
Or not.
He spent his whole life just focused on so many different practices that was devoted to his will, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for him, being able to do that would have been perhaps, you know, possible, but it doesn't seem like it played out in his life. But so I think that that's why I think most people should go the abstinent route. And so Steve, you know, like I would say most people who have problems with hard drugs would probably be better to stay away from alcohol. You know, Keats and I have had this conversation many, many times. My experience in running with people has been like most cases, it's better to stay away from alcohol. But that doesn't mean it's all the cases, because I have met people. I've met counselors who smoke weed and drink alcohol on the weekends, and they seem to be able to make it and do it, do their job, maintain their life. So we make it work. I just don't think it's definitely possible. A person really has to look at your life and really be honest with it to see, to be honest with you guys, I drink too much tea and caffeine.
That's a good problem to have. Yeah.
I'm a coffee addict also. I have like five coffees, like 2 before I leave the house, 3 at work, But the problem I have is since my brain was barely even formed, I've relied on this substance to make me feel like this, and I'm feeling a bit too much like that.
Exactly.
So I've regulated my whole organism to, without some kind of tobacco or caffeine or alcohol, I am really at a loss sometimes as to, not so bad when I'm with my loved ones and stuff, but when I'm in this flat, I really am struggling with sobriety at the moment, to be honest.
It's the quiet moments, right? It's like,
I
those
don't know
always
what the
got
hell I'm
me.
doing myself.
And it's also, I had this whole thing when I was using, it was like, I have something in my pocket that can hijack any bad feeling I have, and there was a comfort in that. At the same time, it's really just pushing back those feelings for a tundra or a tsunami of it, because it all comes up eventually. So, it was more of like an escapism or a disassociation. Why I use, whether it was even, stuff that gets you high, the stuff that gets you low. It was always a euphoria that I was searching for, like, to commune with my brain chemistry in a way that I finally had control.
Yeah.
And when you were talking earlier, Derek, about, the drugs go hand in hand with magic, I think that's true to a degree. I think it's more of like, the psychedelic drugs, I think, have more kind of worth and semblance with like intention and traversing, the airwaves of the subconscious, whereas like the hard drugs just seemed to disassociate me from myself. I didn't feel like a true connection with anything. It was more of an escapism.
Well, if we're talking about mental health, hard drugs are really self-medicating for some unresolved shit that happened in our childhood or whatever. I really, and being with quite a heavy drug-using set in my late teens, early 20s, a lot of damaged people there that possibly would not have survived without the blanket of heroin. Crystal meth has never been very big up here, but crack cocaine certainly was. So what is the greater damage?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's a lot of socioeconomic, identity too with the nature and use of drugs. As a poor kid growing up too, it was always around me. And I saw it, kind of put food on tables for neighbors and whatnot. There was like, which I don't think, they would have been able to survive without that kind of.
Absolutely, there's the drug economy.
Yeah. And so, it's a really, it's a hard notion. That's why I don't want to speak too elegantly about, things outside of my own purview or, experience.
When I was talking about, my experiences with substances and in getting into the occult, it was just my experience. I don't think that just because, I was on crystal meth and my, in one of my ends to the occult was conspiracy theories. And so the meth is definitely a big supporter of conspiracy theories.
Absolutely.
And so, but in all honesty, like my magic has been a lot more beautiful and effective as a sober person. I really feel like my practice has benefited in my sobriety. But certainly, I think certainly, I think alcohol or wine definitely plays. I think for a lot of people who do practice, I think they probably include that in weed and again, like you said, Keats, psychedelics. So I think you really have to find out what works for you. I think that our bodies seem to be designed to be addicts for some weird reason, because if you look at most people, they're addicted to something, it's one way or another, and even if it's a healthy addiction. Like I used to go to the gym before the coronavirus, and I would, I found myself becoming addicted to going to the gym, going 4 times a week, and it would just feel great because it would give me this beautiful head rush. I just these endorphins being released from my exercise, and it was great. And I think that a lot of people become addicted to work and find their way of doing that. Whatever a person is addicted to, is that you have to always be honest with yourself. Is like, what's going on in your life? Is it causing problems in your life? So I think for you, if you're finding that the alcohol is really not causing any problems, like you look at your life, look at your daily life, look at the times when you're drinking alcohol and what's happening, like in your mind and your behaviors with other people. Keats and I have talked about this many times in our private conversations, and that's why for me, I abstain from alcohol. I have to, not only just for behavioral reasons, but for my health. But I knew, talking to when you and I, Keats, would have these conversations. My gut wanted to tell you to abstain, but I also feel that you had to figure out what worked for you, and you were kind of explaining to me that you were okay with alcohol. So I felt like, well, then maybe he'll be fine, because it's so hard to tell that line where your life is fine with alcohol and your line is shit is a very fine line, and it's hard to know what would be better, to abstain or to drink moderately.
I was definitely treating something, very deep and inner, with it. I was leaning on it too much. And the fact is like, yeah, maybe a lot of the okay jovial nights like outweighed the dramatic ones, but the dramatic ones were bad enough to warrant not having that pathway again. You know what I mean? At least for a time.
Yeah, for me, my alcohol thing. I mean, I was a heavy drinker when I was a teenager, also, and I used to be quite a bad drinker. I'd black out, and all my friends would tell me the next day, "Oh my God, you said that to this person, and you did this, and you stood up on the table and took your trousers down, and all that kind of embarrassing stuff." But the Suboxone, because I'm just on 2 milligrams daily. But that seems to have ironed out the excesses of, I don't black out in alcohol. I can kind of drink socially. And to me, it is just a way of surviving without the drugs that I really kind of, my dream world is obsessed with drugs. Every single night I'm dreaming, I'm scoring, I'm in this situation. I have not left my addiction behind. When did I give up? Like 2016? 4 years ago. I've maybe taken heroin once, Valium a couple of times, crack a couple of times.
Yeah.
A long time ago. But I honestly think that if I was just to just go straight, I would probably lose my mind.
It's definitely was a gradual thing for me. Derek's right. He's been kind of a cornerstone for me in correspondence and going through it, and with someone as and of his nature and his background and what he does for a living, it's been totally invaluable to me. But there were many weeks where I would harm reduce and I would try. We've discussed it greatly, where well, I'm drinking, 2 bottles of wine a night, I'll just taper down to 1. Or, it was all this because you can't do, like, I don't believe it's good to just shock the system. You can't just,
I can't do
and I've done that. How I've gotten over things has been cold turkey, and I've almost died, multiple times, and it was unsupervised a lot too. So I totally agree with the idea that, like the idea of Suboxone, I think it's a kind of a grand one too, because you get sick if you use, with it in your system, right?
Well, you
And
just don't get high.
yeah, it just kind of blocks it. Yeah. And, that gives you the ability to taper off, gradually. So there's no shock to the system. I've devised, because I'm a bit, how do I put this? I guess OCD about things, and there's a lot of mental health stuff going on that I was able to kind of throw asunder, with the use of alcohol or whatever, over the past year or so. And I devised, this daily divergent magic ritual thing, which is like I'm piecing the day together like a very long ritual, and I've got it all like written out, that it gets like really specific with times
Is
and
that
everything.
similar to what you said a while back?
Yeah.
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 Oh,
And I
doing
found though, like in what Stevie was saying, I found though me going, okay, I'm going to start at Monday and go full hardcore, right? Like it didn't work well because I tried to thrust myself too overtly, and the shock to the system was too much, so that I would end up kind of putting it by the wayside because I'd just be so tuckered out, and I put too much expectation on me to do it. So in a way, I've found kind of a taper into it, which is I'll seed a few of the things for a couple of weeks every day and gradually grow with that. So I think it's just in our chemistry that we have to like pump the brakes a little bit without crashing the car into a wall. You know what I mean?
right.
Like
Because,
we need the transitory state of it. Yeah.
yeah, it can be very dangerous to just suddenly stop doing something.
Or even suddenly start.
And right, yeah, I remember you were doing that daily ritual. And I thought, wow, this is great. But then I could see it was a little bit too daunting. There was just too much involved.
Yeah.
And like slowly building into it, one step at a time, makes a lot of sense. I think it's important to know, like, when you do a lot of heavy drugs or alcohol, it takes a real big toll on not only your body but your psyche. And some people even believe, like, if someone has been addicted to a drug since their teens, that their emotional intelligence, social skills, certain other kinds of understandings reverts back to that time when they quit doing that drug. It reverts back to that time when they first started it. So let's say I started doing heroin when I was 16 and I stopped when I'm 36. So I've been doing heroin for 20 years. Then when I stop, according to a lot of people, your ability to comprehend things and navigate life goes back to that period when right before you first started doing that drug. I'm not sure if it's as clean cut as that.
I mean, eventually, right? Like,
I had that.
I think there's something to it, though. I think that because when you stop doing something, your ability to do even some basic things can be very difficult.
I felt like when I stopped the heroin, the crack, and the whole scene that I was in, that I I'd missed such a large chunk of my formative years, So I'm starting in my late teens. I kind of recover in my early 30s. So I felt like, oh God, I haven't learned to drive. I was way behind. So in many ways, it felt like I was 20 years younger than I was. you've got to make up that ground somehow, because how can you, and to employers, to suddenly start, I'd never considered getting a job as a serious option. I thought I was like, I'm on the scrap heap, as many drug addicts feel. They feel that they're so out of society that there's no way back. Luckily, I did have other interests. Magic was a very important one, art, music, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the people that I was hanging about with didn't have that, so where else do they go, and how do you restart your life?
Yeah, I was lucky. I think the thing that anchored me through, those like hollowed out years was, music, writing. I've always had that inclination to kind of anchor in that way. But yeah, I definitely know what you mean. I don't I'm lucky. I count my blessings on that. I have great gratitude that, I was able to kind of continuously do that. Whereas, folks that don't have an outlet like that, like I have very strong like empathy for, in a way. You know what I mean? Like if they don't have that supposition to anchor themselves and to keep kind of creating or doing things, like you said, with music or art or whatever, then it's like really hard to get out of the woods when there's nothing to look forward to.
Definitely. I think that's a huge, huge thing because, I think that's why like a lot of addicts who don't really have things that they can do to be productive, I think if you can't seem to find something to motivate you, it would be really in the person's best interest to join the fellowship of like the 12 steps and immerse yourself in that. Go to meetings every day, get a sponsor, do the 12 steps, get a job or get a role in the community, helping out, help out others. Like just throw yourself into that. And that's what I've seen people do. Is they just throw themselves into the 12-step fellowship. There's also other fellowships too, so that your whole life is basically consumed by it, and you can get a job, relationships, and I think that it gives people things to do because
I also appreciate the communal aspect of it. I think there's something very like lonely and dejected about going through, these struggles. And as much as I kind of scoff about, what maybe the, stereotype of like a program is, the few times that I've went and stuff, I've rather enjoyed it. I almost felt like I didn't deserve it, because it was just so welcoming and ready and able to kind of be there for you.
Well, there's definitely how can I say this without sounding too cynical? There's another aspect to that welcoming. So it's sincere, it's real, it's love.
You're not talking about like a codependency a bit?
Well, there's that. Yeah, there's that for sure. But there it's definitely a genuine thing. I don't think it's disingenuous. I think they really sincerely want people to be included in a because they were included. So it's extremely important. But there is another element to it, which is basically you're going to help out in some way too. So it's like any organization or any group is that they want you to join and be a part of it. But you have to do your side of it as well. You're going to contribute in some way in helping other people out too. So but I think that's kind of the norm for any community.
Any collective or community. Yeah.
I think sometimes people see that aspect.
Oh, your mic is going in and out.
Oh,
there it goes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So it's just something I think people need to be aware of is that it's not necessarily an altogether bad thing that there is that.
Yeah, I think the communal aspect to me was, the most important. I definitely went at it alone. Knowing that you don't have to means a lot. And now with the advent of kind of the parasocial relationships we all have, especially in a time of quarantine, there's there's a community out there, and it's easy. I mean, we're sitting here having this wonderful conversation about these deep, heavy subjects, and all over the world right now. We're in, we're across the world talking right now about these things, and so it's different when it's the advent where, like, the communities are at your fingertips if you search for them.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think it's important for people to know that, because if you're not into the 12 steps, people should know about me. I'm not a 12-stepper. I tried doing the 12 steps twice with two gentlemen that I respect and admire, both who I knew personally, and tried doing the 12 steps with them, but it just was not for me. And early on in my sobriety, I was looking for alternatives to the 12 step, and fortunately, there's definitely a lot of alternatives to them. There's just so many different groups out there. Pretty much anything that if you have a belief system of your own, you're going to find something very similar to it out there, especially on the internet. There's tons of support groups out there.
Well, and to bring it back to the confluence of Magick, right? Like I think meeting you guys was through Magick. These, people that I share a lot of the same, trials and tribulations, but because of our search, for the communion of the other and metaphysics or whatever, like it brought us together to kind of open up and talk about these things. And I think that's the other wonderful part about Magick, is when you start, looking and working, you do find the others, and it's like a lot deeper than just finding other, armchair occultists or whatever. It's like you find personalities and beingness and like heavy vexations and ex-hexes, and you know what I mean, like a true personable community.
Absolutely. I think that's been so important for me. Is I had to jettison basically the guys that I'd known since I was like 11, 12 years old. We had a big gang of us that were always doing stuff together, drugs mainly. And I had to distance myself from them so much. And I still haven't really replaced the real life friends, because they're just too risky. Because I know if I get with them, oh, you still got that phone number, So you guys are my friends. My actual friends. And I think that's very important, that we have a worldwide community of weirdos, dropouts, and strange, misguided people.
Naysayers, ne'er-do-wells, and rogues.
Yeah, baby. So let's go into, I'm sure there are addicts watching this right now, or when it's played back on record. What advice could we as survivors offer them? They're interested in the occult, but for me, what advice would I give myself, who had convinced myself that being on drugs was kind of magical and thelemic, and I was doing my true will by ignoring the straits, and how can we drag these people into a semblance of spirituality?
I'd say this first, and this is something I wish that I had done. I'd reach out sooner. I would, the people that are watching this, if they have questions, reach out to us personally, start a dialogue, keep the conversation going. I think there's a lot of stigma and shame about it, and it's bullshit. We need to eradicate that. And so my goal is to be more personable with people that have questions about how I've worked, even though mine is completely experiential. I don't have a lot of advice when it comes to the, different machinations and variables that make a person how they can do it. But I will say, finding that community and being open about it, keeping the dialogue going, keeping the discourse, reaching out, having personal conversations, having, one-on-one just vexations, has helped a ton. And it's not a lonely thing. This is this has been a pandemic for forever, right? Before this one that shut us in. And it is a disease. And I think like we need to kind of wrap our arms around each other and, kind of go forward. And it's just like a magical like practice, right? A lot of things, and especially in certain avenues of magic, you find teachers, you find mentors, you find people to discuss with, these things that could just break open your head to wonderful experiences. And I will say that I have had transitory states in my magical workings, like when you shut down the like addiction, or you mute it a bit, it's not that you stop transdimensionally wayfaring. You know what I mean? Like there are other avenues to do that, and this is one of them. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah,
agree with Keats there, and I think that's really important to know that for people who are into the occult and you want, say, either to reduce the amount of drugs that you do, or you want to switch up the drug to something more minor, some more like harm reduction, or you want to abstain, the key thing that you have to understand is you do not have to give up your interest in the occult. You do not have to give up your practices. And that was one of the beautiful things that I found out when I quit. When I really, truly did the transformation was when I quit alcohol. And that was in 2014. And that was the time when I created Love Chaos, was that I was looking, because my feeling was that people had to be born again, had to turn to Jesus and the Lord, and had it's a book, and you had to be basically you had to, and so you had to become like a believer, like especially in Christianity, right? Or you basically had to believe in something, and it's just not true. Like you can continue to do your practices and have your beliefs the way that they were before, but you have to alter what you're actually doing regarding the substances, So I think that's really important to know. Like I still have a very intimate daily relationship with Babylon, and with a lot of entities like Pan and others that are kind of considered to be very like much about intoxication, revelry, joy, in pleasure. And so what I did was that I basically did not want to stop enjoying life. I had to continue finding pleasure. I just had to find the pleasure and intoxication in other ways. But yeah, just I think I really want to hammer home what Keith said earlier, was that you don't wait to reach out. You really need to reach out to other people. Addiction is really not something that you can kind of just do on your own. And this is coming from somebody who's a staunch individualist. And my big kind of breakthrough was allowing other people to help me, and knowing that I didn't have all the answers, and that I had to be able to be open to being humble enough that I did need other people to help me. I needed other people in my life. And when I was accepting of that, that's really when a lot of things happen. And it just, I think for anyone who's listening or watching this that has had problems with addiction, think about all the time and energy that you spent to get your drug, doing your drug. And so if you're planning on quitting that drug, you're going to have to spend just the same amount of time, the same amount of energy as you did when you're to quit it and to stay away from it, as you did to pursue it and to do it, if not more. I think it's really important to know the seriousness of it. I think a lot of times, I had the same problem. I think we all do, is we tend to minimize how serious this is. And so we don't really tackle it as serious as it really is. We don't do all the necessary things that we need to do on a daily basis to get sober and to maintain our sobriety. Again, just think about it. Think about all the time and energy you spent in getting your drug. That's what you're going to have to do to stay away from it.
That was part of it. That was part of it. The zombie walk in the desert to score. Like imagine the hours, spent like waiting for that phone call, or trying to connect with people to do that. And I think that's what helps is I rest a lot on those times of panic, of like sickness, of annoyance, of just like sheer like depravity of the self, and sitting and waiting, that helps me abstain a bit, and just like, God, I don't want to go through that.
It's the dependence on, I mean, drug addicts are notoriously superstitious as well, but it's the breaking away from the powerlessness of addiction and stepping into a magical worldview where you are at the center, I think the difference between religion and magic is magic's down to you. If you Thelite, it's will, isn't it? It's your personal force and your personal. What's the opposite of inertia? Momentum.
Yeah.
Momentum to move forward and stop relying on that drug dealer getting up at a certain amount of time and what's the chances. I spent honestly 10 years of my life waiting for some fucking arsehole.
Right. Yeah.
But too, just not only the waiting, but just all the social interactions that we had was revolved around that drug. Like, I can think about all the people that I was with, both women and men, and just like my main reason for why I was with them was because they had a connection, for me to the crystal meth. And a lot of the relationships I had with women were heroin addicts, and they would be with me because I had connections to heroin. So it would be my life. And this was during the time when my son was alive. I was spending more time with these heroin addict girlfriends, or going to clubs, or going to Orange County, going here, going there, meeting this person, meeting that person, taking this person. Oh, they're going to go rob that person, or they're going to do this, or they're going to steal this car. And it's all like, you get all this, man, it just, and I think I didn't mean to scare people, like meaning that like you have to spend this intense amount of time for sobriety, but people really do need to take it seriously. It's not going to be something just like the next day, here we go, snap your fingers, right? And it's a process. It takes time, and you're in as strong as a willpower as you may have. It's not really about. I agree with you, Saroth, about magic, and I think that's true. But I think there's a certain part of it is putting in, preparing yourself and making the right decisions is just as important as willpower.
And I think it's also like, the importance of interpersonal dynamics and, harm to others, even yourself too. And I think that's, my workings with magic, in the beginning was this like just incredible source of maybe not feeling so singular in the world, feeling more, connected, and, in this blanket of, consciousness or whatever, the somatic reality that we all share, and understanding that, yes, there is a practice to control and project will, but there's just as much practice to control and project that will without harming other people in the process too. And one thing through my like studies within metaphysics and, my addiction and mental health issues, I've come to is this communion that's needed with brain chemistry, and considering brain chemistry as the other of which to commune with, because oftentimes it's a lack of control, right? And a lot of times, in mental health and a lot of onset, mental issues and stuff that are systemic kind of the self, like it's not, you're not in control of it. So it's trying to find this communion as you would with another entity, your brain chemistry, to kind of work in tandem with each other, and to be, less harmful, or more. Yeah, communion is just like the biggest word I can think of for it. And I think that to me, that's like synonymous with magic. It's communion.
Yeah, right. It's definitely, there's so many different parts to it. there's the communion, there's the willpower, the willingness, the desire, and I think it's also, again, going back to making right decisions. And sort of, for one thing, it's like you, Steve, you were talking about, burning your bridges from your previous friends who were using with you. And I think it's sad because we have these
very painful process for me.
You have these friendships with people that there is more to than just the drug. There's definitely a lot more to it than just, hey, you're going to get high, I'm going to get high. You build relationships and bonds with people. I had some really great friendships with other addicts, and I think that when we in our sobriety, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, we look back at that time and realize that it's not as cold cut as maybe we sometimes think. But it is about that, though. It's making those painful decisions to because that's a huge part of addiction is using with other people, and it is a social has a social function. So we have to make the decisions to be around the people who are not going to, perhaps offer us that pipe or that needle. And I because as a counselor, I see there's so many guys who coming out of prison who are planning to go back to their buddies back in the hood, who are still using, or still slamming dope, and still gang banging, and they think, well, I've got this really strong willpower, and so they may offer the drugs to me, or they may want to go do this or do that for the hood or whatever, but I'm going to say no. And I'm like, well, you maybe you can, like, initially you can be able to be in that environment and say no and not do drugs and so forth, and still remain a friendship. But at some point, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to say yes, and that you're going to go back and you're going to get into that thing. So environment is, like, I think maybe 70% of it. Choosing your environment.
Yeah.
Choosing the people that you're around, and who you associate with, and who you spend your time with.
Yeah, there's so many, like, outside, influences to the machinations that get you back into it. It's incredible. Sorry to cut you off, Stevie.
No, sorry, it just reminded me of one of my pet occult theories is Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, 8-circuit brain model, where you make imprints. So you've imprinted addiction on one of those circuits. So you have to find a more powerful imprint to kind of erase that. It's very mechanical in that way, the human psychological brain hardware, really. Yeah. So if we can take the transcendence that we used to get from drug addiction and re-imprint devotion to a deity or a practice, meditation, that will work. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, it's also too, like I said, quitting alcohol was also an attempt to kind of rewire my brain from the nonchalance and the casualness of, this is my second sober stream. Like, it got to a point where even I'm awkward in social interactions, like interpersonal ones, physically, right? Alone. It would take me, I'd have to drink, or I'd have to have something, an exit strategy, or just, something, it's like hardwired in my brain to just escape it, or have, some illicit kind of casualness with it using, substances. And it started to hardwire into streaming and talking online. And I started to, see that the circuit was that any social interaction, no matter if it's in person or, through this boob tube or whatever, there's like this, just this, need for supplementing it the same as I would anything else. And
yeah. I used to believe I was like quite an extreme extrovert, but that was because I was on drugs, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I realize that I'm absolutely introverted, and it takes me like 2 or 3 beers to even send a text.
That-
I'm that bad.
That's another great thing to explore too, is how you feel about yourself and how you interact with the world. The extrovert introvert thing, social experiences, because that was huge for me. I wouldn't go to a party unless I had a drink. Like I basically believed that I liked the kind of person I was on alcohol. And then,
I
of course,
can't talk to my family without drinking.
so many things, and then so that turned into crystal meth. I loved the person who I was on meth. I felt like Superman. Like I could do anything. I could, go to clubs and talk to any girl and pick her up and take her home. And, it was just something that built this in confidence in me. But I think for both of you guys, what happened is that the drug initially, whether it's alcohol or drug or crystal meth, I became this person I didn't like to be at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing for people who are watching this right now, is that if you find yourself doing things or behaving in ways that you don't like, you see yourself, then that's a good time to maybe question whether the thing you're doing is good for you or not. But
yeah, I wasn't being as intentional as I should have been, say, with streams and interconnectivity via social media and stuff. And I almost kind of took it as second nature. It's just my nature that it's kind of all of a joke, and no one can read my acerbic nature or my sardonic humor, so fuck them. And it's like really ostracizing myself and realizing through the advent of 2020 and the quarantine, like this is kind of all we got. And I was allowing myself to excuse myself and to be too casual and to drink and be too silly or too, who cares, laissez-faire or whatever, just like whatever. And that's, that helped feed the need for like the ostracism that I felt, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like the separation. And I've been diagnosed bipolar. I've been treated for it. And like I said in the beginning, my drugs were extremes. I have this need for dynamism in my life. It's just, just kind of a part of my nature. It's either super high or super low. It's brain chemistry, but it's also experience. And it's been trying to find that middle ground where, I can be calm, complacent, serious, intentful, without needing for everything to be a magnanimous experience in some way has been the real difficult thing. But I'm with you, Stevie. Like if it wasn't for these sorts of things and me trying to rewire my brain into being more socially, adept, without alcohol and all of that, yeah, I'd be happy just tinkering, with my music and writing quietly. And
why do we feel the need to? I ask myself this all the time. Every time I arrange a show, I think, yeah, that'd be a fantastic idea. That'd be really interesting. And then, like, I thought, oh God, I've got this show to do. Oh no, I don't want to. Why? Why are we like that, Keats? Derek, why are we like that? I don't know. And why are we drawn to the occult so much?
What you mean? So you're asking, why do we turn to substance to make us feel comfortable?
Well, why do we keep putting ourselves in position?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Where we feel like we need to, like it's by our hand. You know what I mean? Like no one's making us do a stream or performance.
YouTube channel. Like, hi, I'm Saroth the Mage. Right. I know a lot of stuff about loads of things, and actually I don't.
Right? Yeah, and that's been my purveyance too, with the podcast and all of that. Is like this is just for me. It's just a learning tool. Like this is not a soapbox, so to speak. But I get what Saroth is saying. Like why, or Stevie, I'm sorry. Why we
no more Saroth.
Yeah, no more Saroth. Why we continuously put ourselves in these positions. A part of me feels like, all my years as like a musician and a touring musician, and even all my years as a writer, there was always kind of an alcohol element to it, and the streams that made it easier and kind of fun to do it. Now taking that element away from it, there's a lot of stress, waking up this morning going, oh God, am I really going to talk about all of this, serious, heavy shit about myself? But, it's like I keep putting myself in positions where I think, I can handle it, probably because I'm hardwired to think I have an aid to help in handling it.
Sure.
And when I don't, it's like, yeah, why am I doing this? It's so stressful. It's so
prophets of the new aeon, the age of Aquarius, and we're called to it. We're martyrs.
One thing that was really I was very frightened of when I was getting sober was for as you guys know, my writing is almost number one up there for me. Right after my son is my writing, and so I was very afraid that I would never be able to write again as a sober person, and I actually didn't write for the first year. I waited a while, and actually I ended up going back to school to take classes to become a drug and alcohol counselor. So I didn't really do a lot of my own writing anyway. I spent a lot of time away from my own creative writing because I had associated my writing, my creativity, with some kind of substance, whether it be alcohol.
As did I. This is my major problem.
Yeah, and so it in the beginning, I especially because those first couple of books that I published in 2012, I had initially written them sober, or at least under alcohol. I'd written them under alcohol, but then the last versions, last couple of years, I wrote them, rewrote them, and I was on crystal, and my mind was just all over the place, and it found its way on the page for sure. So I really found like I was frightened as hell that I would just no longer be able to be creative. And so it was a slow process of getting back into it, but definitely it helped having coffee. It definitely helped having cigarettes. So I knew I had to have those things. Like, okay, well, I can write. I started writing again. I was like writing essays for the first time in years in those classes I was taking. So it helped with that. I was kind of just slowly working back at it, and it just finding that, oh, okay, I can write on coffee and cigarettes.
Yeah.
I don't need alcohol.
I do my best writing in the morning, sans even breakfast, like
nice.
Without putting a bunch of stuff in the body,
It is hard. It is because we have this desire to create and express ourselves and to be understood. We want people to understand us and to appreciate us and to respect what we do because it's so important. But we're afraid of how other people are going to view it. We're afraid how we're going to view it. How are we going to be? Are we going to be happy with what we express? And so these substances kind of help to overcome that fear, that insecurity.
For me, it's always been the performative aspect that needed, the alcohol or whatever. When I'm alone and tinkering and working on stuff, I can reach that state myself. I actually have never really used, drugs to create. And the times I've done, I've come out with, the worst pish posh applesauce I think anyone's ever read or heard,
Mm-hmm.
So I learned quite quickly that it was more of like when I wasn't creating, that's what I was doing. You know what I mean?
Sure. I think caffeine seems to be the best drug to do some good writing, you know, because it does.
Definitely not meth,
Yeah. I actually, when I look back at those books that I wrote back in 2012, my first novel, and the short story collection.
Right. Oh, you were intoxicated there?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so it, some of the stuff that I came up with was like, wow. I mean, I think the thing why I still like those books is that they were originally written when I was sober or under alcohol and coffee. So they had like a structure to them. So the stories were already there. And then I just messed around with the language, and the crystal definitely helped to produce some weird, magnificent stuff. But then eventually I found my writing was getting worse while I was writing with under meth and other drugs. It was getting worse and worse. And that was another motivation for me for the stop.
Okay. To play devil's advocate for a minute,
Yeah.
Do we think that drugs are bad across the board and never do drugs, kids, because it always leads to Gotterdammerung?
No, I think we'd have to define drugs. Maybe something like meth and heroin, I could agree with. That they're probably bad across the board. But then again, who am I to say? I'm sure people, if they, with the right amount of intent and experiential nature of it, once in a blue moon, safely or whatever, there's a lot of caveats to it. But as far as drugs across the board, no. I think that, psychedelics can be useful for the self. I think, and they're coming out with a lot of studies that, cannabis, psychedelics, even Molly, ketamine, these things can help in therapeutic ways if taken correctly and under care. So, yeah.
It's a vexed question, isn't it? It's like it's finding a fine line. I'm struggling to find that line at the moment,
Yeah, as far as self-medicating, yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, just as someone that doesn't have the medical knowledge to know what I'm doing with it, as far as like my intake or what I should be kind of regulating or whatever. But as when it comes to having some supervised effort and a kind of nurse practitioner looking over you, or just someone with a maybe an academic knowledge of biochemistry and biology, I could see it being beneficial to if necessary. But as far as just kind of being out in the dark woods alone, naked, stark and raving, like I think that's
well, you've been there, Keats.
Oh yeah,
I know that.
I think it's a complicated thing. I think you can't just say no to drugs. It's not something that that Nancy Reagan solution to the war on drugs is just not. It doesn't work. And I think
the war on drugs lost.
Yeah,
drugs won.
I think though that I think that we really have to look at it in terms of the evidence and people's personal experiences. And I think that I think we should be careful not to be either too anti-drugs or too pro-drugs. I think currently right now, marijuana is taking on, it's just so popular, and certainly is not nearly as dangerous as a lot of other drugs. But I think in reality, from my own personal experiences, not just my own use of it, but seeing other people on it, it has some downfalls for sure. I've seen some really bad things as a consequence of people taking marijuana. And so I think that we really have to look at each individual drug, see what it does, see how certain people respond to it. Some people go on a murderous rampage on something really slight and small, just because of their brain chemistry, and like how they respond to the drug. So I definitely don't think, I'm really big, for one thing, for sure, we should definitely decriminalize drugs. People
absolutely. There needs to be avenues for rehabilitation. Yeah.
Yeah, we have so many people in our prison system here in California. Just
I know. Oh God, the American prison system just it's the injustice of it.
Yeah. It's, and we're trying to get as many people out of prison right now in California. And I, as a counselor who works at a reentry program, that's what we do. We're getting guys out to go to treatment and then go out into the street. And so I think we're in the process right now. Obama basically mandated when he was president. He told California, you've got to release a certain amount of prisoners over a certain amount of time, because we just had just so many people in our prisons here.
I mean, being incarcerated for weed is just ridiculous, beyond control, beyond all get out.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question, Steve. I think I definitely, I think people shouldn't get too excited one way or the other. That's how my feeling is. You shouldn't be too excited about being anti-drug, and I think you should be careful about being like a big proponent for drugs.
It reminds me, Derek, Stevie brought up, Timothy Leary earlier, and that whole tune in, drop out, everyone should tune in, drop out culture. I never agreed with. Not everyone should take acid. Like, not everyone should take acid. As much as it helps maybe a large portion of the users and stuff, it's too hard to blanket. It's just way too hard to be general about those things, either pro or against.
Definitely.
I think it was a very interesting time, the late 60s, the doors to,
Yeah.
what we're seeing now with that crazy demonstration at the fucking Congress building.
Yeah, Capitol
is like another little quake in the dawning aeon of Aquarius.
Well, I think you're right.
Good. I don't know.
My dad was and my mom were, they're baby boomers, and they're part of that time. My dad went to prison for 3 years because he was a believer in that revolution. He believed that the true revolution was opening people's minds through psychedelics, and the drug that he sold was synthetic mescaline, and he would only give it to certain people. He thought, was very careful about selling it to people, but he really truly believed that he was a part of a movement. And so I definitely find a lot of fault at that time, but I understand where they're coming from. Like, they were really trying. They thought that Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson was part of that too, and they really thought they were a part of a revolution, and that these certain kinds of drugs would help people.
I do believe that it was ongoing to a certain extent, but there's so much noise, electronic static craziness.
Yeah.
So, guys, I think we've had a fairly good chat.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely pleasure to meet you, Derek. I've still got to read your books. I'll just share them on.
Okay.
And 2 books,
There you are. Yes.
End of the world.
And guess who wrote the foreword to both of them?
Oh, well, it was Keats. Can I write the forward to the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have Keats write forward to the books. It's definitely something that it really helped tremendously.
It was a great honor to write the forwards, for sure, and they're great works. Yeah, people really should check out Derek and all of his wonderful multimedia artistic expressions.
When are you going to write a book, Keats?
I've got a couple. I've got a fiction one, and I've got working on the Divergent Magic one. Maybe 2021. I had I was doing a treatment for the Divergent Magic one for a publisher in Portland, and I'm like on the fence. I don't want. No one needs another how-to fucking magic book. They really don't.
Really
So it's more of like an experiential kind of biographical thing about my work with magic and addiction and mental health and stuff. So it's we'll see. But hopefully there's a lot of good things coming out in 2021. The audio sigil that we're both a part of should be done by my birthday. Our birthdays. Yeah.
Is the audio sigil ever going to come out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I basically made 3 separate little mini albums that, to kind of tether all of this stuff together. So, yeah, it's just, with life and everything going on, it's just been a slow burn, but it's definitely going to come out. And it's going to come out. I hope to have the masters ready by the end of February. So.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could have done a part 2, part 3, part 4. Well, maybe we actually should. This has been the opening stanza.
Sure.
We can do more. I'd love to speak more to you, Derek.
It's on my mind that we do something like this again. Maybe include other people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have like a round table or something.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, brothers.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolute pleasure and honor as ever. Okay, guys. Good night. I'm ending the broadcast now.